Very good. And is it scrolling through, Rita?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
right.
Yeah. We had a couple of new people since you last. Welcome, everyone.
Great, thank you. So if anyone who's just joined could please register in our chat. Also for anyone who does live in San Mateo County, I did put the link to our latest survey in there. While we're taking a minute here, if you have a moment to open up that survey, we'd love to have you participate. Okay.
We are at 2:04, and should we get started?
Yes, and I believe we do have quorum, so let's get started. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Rita Mancera. I think by now you all know me. I'm the executive director of Puente and co-chair of this committee. And welcome everybody to the meeting. And I want to let you know that Dan will be joining us later today. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to give thanks to Anne because Anne and Hillary are always helping us to run these meetings very, very smoothly. And to all the steering committee members as well. Remember, we're going to have a certain way to run the meeting. We have an agenda that we share with all the committee members. And we're going to get started first, asking a question to warm us all up. And if we can have, please, the list of all the committee members, and that will be great. Thank you. So the question for this time is, we initiated our second survey on June 4th, seeking input from the community on mitigation actions that would assist them. And we want to ask you that if you live in San Mateo County, have you filled out survey number 2? And have you distributed the survey to your organization's network? So I'll start and then we'll go in alphabetical order. I did fill it out last week, I think on Thursday or Friday. And I did share it with my network on Facebook. And I also sent it by text to some people that I think that's the way that they will respond, a very personal invitation. Let's go to Andrew.
Hi, yes, this is Andrew Belak from Mid-Penn Housing. I do not live in San Mateo County, so I did not fill the survey out myself, but I have been distributing it to folks in my network that are located in the county, yes.
All right, thank you. Ben. And maybe you can help me if some of the committee members are not present. Is Ben with us?
Yes, yeah. I think you surprised him because you went a little out of order, Rita. David.
Oh, we're going on last name. You're right. Okay. All right. I was going on the first names. Okay. I was doing all this mind exercise. So sorry about that, Ben. We'll get to you. We're going to go to David.
Hi, David Cosgrave, Chief Division Chief for CAL FIRE, San Mateo County Fire, and Coast Side Fire. And we've been distributing the list through our CERT organization and other organizations.
Thank you, Chief. John?
John Gomez is absent today, Rita.
Thank you, Ann. Robert?
I don't see Robert on the list.
Okay, I'm gonna make my screen show me more names as well. Okay, Terrence?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terrence Shaw, Director of Public Works from the City of Redwood City. I do not live in San Mateo County, but I shared this survey with the City of Redwood City Neighborhoods Associations, various neighborhood associations, and to be put it on their Facebook pages and things like that. So I have seen it, the association co-chair and chairs posted on their webpage. So that was a pretty good deal. And then also some of the HOA posted on their individual HOA websites. So, thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Okay, Ben.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Benzar Minkin. I'm the emergency manager for the San Mateo County Community College District. So I do live in San Mateo County, and it's been shared with the administration and the groups within the district that are managing right now the event, that hazard mitigation within the district.
Okay, thank you. Ever, is Ever on the call?
I don't see Ever.
Yeah, I don't see him either. Okay, we'll see if he joins in a little bit. Violet is not with us, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Belen?
Good afternoon, everyone. Belen, we did share via Get Healthy San Mateo County newsletter and social media. And I filled it up as well.
Thank you. With your name on the screen.
Because I have Maria.
Yeah, I was like, I
have
don't
to
see
change
Belen.
that.
Amelia.
Hi, my name is Amelia Timbers. I'm with the San Mateo County Transit District, and I still need to send it out, but I will do so. I do not live in the county.
Okay, thank you. And Sandra.
Hi, everybody. I am a San Mateo County resident. I have filled out the form. I think I was one of the first people to do that. And we have distributed the form at an in-person event that we had. We had a lovely reopening barbecue on June the 15th. And so I think we got 16 surveys completed at that time. And then we are opening our services on the 7th of July. And so we plan to collect some more pen and paper surveys then. And then we've also been working with Abundant Grace to try and get some of our homeless population to complete the survey. And despite offering food and financial incentives, we just haven't had any takers from the homeless community, but we will keep on trying there.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for the efforts, because we know that you're already pretty busy with your day jobs and still supporting this effort that is so much needed as well. So thanks for that. Okay, so that was our roll call. The next thing is to see if anybody has any changes to the agenda. Okay, I don't see anyone raising hands. Okay, so we'll say that there's no changes to the agenda. Thank you. The next part of our agenda, and these first parts, it seems like we're just flying through, but it is very important as well. Does any of the steering committee members have any questions or comments about the minutes from our meeting in May?
They look good.
Okay, and I see people saying no with their heads as well. So this is an action item. We will need a motion to approve the minutes from May.
I'll make the motion to adopt, Chief Cosgrave.
Thank you, Chief.
I can second Belen.
Thank you, Belen. Okay, this part is done. Okay.
Excuse me, Rita. We do have a quorum, so we can ask if is there anyone who objects?
Does anybody objects? No. Okay, thank you. Then the minutes are approved.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're gonna go to the next, to item number 2. On June 10th, Tetra Tech presented information on the hazard risk assessment to a working group of steering committee members and planning partners. Today, Rob will provide us with similar information for those who were not able to attend. And after his presentation, we will have an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll go in the order that we have been following through these committee meetings. First, the steering committee members, then planning partners, and then the public.
At this point, well, we'll hand it over to Rob. He'll load his presentation.
Thank you, Ann. Rita, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be, gosh, our 5th steering committee meeting. Boy, how time flies. On the 10th, we did a formal presentation of the risk assessment results and the ranking to all the partnerships. So this is an abbreviation of that for you all. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of risk ranking and whatever. We're really going to kind of just cut to the chase and get to the results. But Rita, are you seeing my slide okay? I just want to make sure everybody's okay. Great.
Yes.
So risk ranking. It is a FEMA requirement for these plans that we measure the impacts of hazards, and for the purposes of identifying mitigation actions and prioritizing appropriate actions for the hazards that have the highest impacts, we have to rank them so we can compare them to each other. So, you know, the primary objective for this is FEMA does not want you to have blinders on. In essence, you know, California was always a good example, right? Earthquake, earthquake, earthquake. Well, guess what? California also have wildfires. They also have floods. They have dam problems. You know, there's all kinds of things. So what we want to make sure everybody does, and, you know, once again, realizing this is a multi-jurisdictional plan, is to see what everybody's individual risk is. So what San Mateo's risk is versus Redwood City's versus Belmont's versus Fire District 55, 39, whatever. We have 36 planning partners. Each of those 36 planning partners need to evaluate risk and compare the impacts of each hazard so they can identify appropriate actions. So Tetra Tech has devised, and, you know, for every plan that we've ever done, what we call a risk ranking methodology. And the 2016 plan applied the same methodology, and it defines risk as probability times impact. Okay, so risk, probability, how often can it occur, has it occurred, the frequency of occurrence. All of our planning partners have been doing a really, really great job of filling out their jurisdictional annexes that give us information to help substantiate probability. And we had our phase 3 workshops over the last couple of weeks, and are getting more information to help us do that. So probability is how often can it occur, does it occur. Then we look at impact, and we want to say, what is the impact of each hazard on the people, property, and economy of the planning area. And we also want to look at what we call continuity of operations. And we have two types of planning partners. We have municipalities and we have special purpose districts. So the municipalities have permit and police powers. So they have codes and standards that regulate development. So they're responsible for what we call general building stock, or your house, my house, everybody's house. So when we measure impact of people, property, and economy for a municipality, we're really looking at the tax base and the building stock in each municipality. When we look at the impact on people, property, and economy for a district, we're actually looking at its ability to provide its service. So when we measure the impact on people for a district, we're not really taking into account maybe 100% of its service area. We're taking into account its ratepayers or whoever it's providing its service to. And then when we look at the property, we're actually looking at the property of the district, right? The asset that the district uses to provide its service. And we want to know of its assets, what are the exposure. And then the last thing we look at for districts is continuity of operations. So if a hazard event happened, how long would that district be out of operation? So that's the economic impact for districts. So we have two tracks that when we're looking at this data, that we're creating this information because it's for our partnership. So our risk ranking results are what we call jurisdiction specific. We do have some problems trying to line up our data with districts, right? Because districts have special boundaries. For municipalities, we have city limits, and city limits jive with census tract and census blocks, which is a big piece of the data sets that we use. Census tract and blocks don't always align with district boundaries. So we do have some issues when it comes time to present the results. And you'll notice you won't see data outputs for any of the districts by themselves. So we have a whole methodology that we walk through the districts on how to interpret this data and whatnot. So that's kind of an overarching view of the concept of risk ranking. So basically, in a nutshell, every hazard gets a score. And then we compare the scores of each hazard, and that's how they're ranked. So this is the risk ranking results from the 2016 plan. Okay, so this is kind of how we present them. And you'll notice that we ranked earthquake high, severe weather, wildfire, flood, landslide. And we had a corresponding category that we assigned for each ranking. And we've come up with a breakpoint in the metrics. So a score of 35 and higher is high, 15 to 35 is medium, anything less than 15 is low. And it's just to kind of correlate it in that we don't want people to get too hung up in the numbers. You know, oh, wow, 54, you know, well, 35 is just as much risk as a 54. They're both high impacts, and we want to make sure everybody focuses the attention of the action plan on the appropriate metric. So this was the results from then. And so there's a lot of analysis that's gone on into this, okay? And each planning partner got this spreadsheet. And so you've heard us talk about HAZUS modeling. And I apologize if this font is small. And if you would all like to see or get this so you can look at this, we'd be glad to send out the loss matrix to everybody so you can see the actual results. But what we did is we modeled each hazard. And if you remember right early in our dialogue with you all, remember we talked about scenarios and what flood are we going to look at? What dams are we going to look at? What earthquakes are we going to model? We modeled 5 different earthquakes, 3 different floods. We looked at 2 different sea level rise scenarios. We looked at what we call an aggregate dam failure. These color codes, you see the green, the blue, and the yellow, all correspond to those impact matrix. Green is people, blue is property, yellow is economy. And each of these are the metrics that we use to establish the weighted value when we are coming up with a score. So there's a formula for each hazard where we take probability times impact, and we'll assign a probability based upon either the historic data or probabilistic modeling. When I say probabilistic, FEMA generates a 100-year flood map, right? And it's based on a 100-year floodplain. A 100-year flood is not a flood that happens once every 800 years. It's a flood that has a 1% chance of occurring in a given year. That's what we call probabilistic mapping. And they're actually based upon, for flood maps, it's a historic hydrograph. And that's how they create the probability. We do the same thing with earthquake, where you look at the frequency of occurrence and you can establish probabilities. And so if we have probabilities, that goes into the metric for the probability. If we don't, we're just using history, loss history, like wildfires. There's no probabilistic wildfire mapping, but obviously in the state of California, we have a lot of wildfire activity, and we can actually use what we call fire perimeter data to assign probability. So anyway, there's a lot of number crunching that goes into the formula, and I don't want you to get too worried about all this. In the old days, and I always laugh, the old days, 10 years ago, we used to make every planning partner do their own math. And I was one of those pundits that said, you need to be able to calculate your risk and understand how the math works so you can understand the risk. Well, that didn't work too well. Nobody ever could come up with the math. They didn't understand the algebra and the formulas. And so we just said, guess what? We're going to run the numbers for you, give you the results, and then let you qualitatively adjust the quantitative data. Now, I think that's the real important message here. This is based upon best available data in science, and not always does the data in science accurately reflect what we have, right? I mean, think about floodplains in these flood maps. We know that there are problems with the FEMA flood maps. FEMA doesn't map all flood risk. FEMA is constantly updating maps. So when we run our formula metrics using FEMA maps, we may not be capturing the entire risk, and we know we're not capturing the entire risk. So what we have guided all the communities to say is, if you do not agree with the quantitative results, feel free to qualitatively adjust based upon your knowledge of your area. So what we have here, and I just, before I dive into, I'll show you the results. I just want to touch bases with, and I'll show you the final scoring without showing you the math. If you all remember, we also are applying an equity lens. We came up with a new method for taking the impact of social vulnerability into account. We're using a national data set produced by FEMA called the NRI. NRI stands for the National Risk Index. And under the National Risk Index, there is a social vulnerability layer of information that was created by the University of South Carolina for FEMA that uses social vulnerability classifications generated by the census. And it's about 36 layers of information that all have weighted values, and they created the social vulnerability index. So we've taken that data layer, incorporated it into our metrics and our ranking formula so that we could apply an equity lens. Now, the equity lens was set up to be optional, where a jurisdiction can choose to apply the equity lens or not to choose to apply the equity lens. It was real interesting when we actually ran all the analysis. We found that with the equity lensing, you'll see the impacts of the two results, that actually may be the factor that somebody wants to use for this qualitative adjustment. So we have two sets of results, the baseline results and the equity lens. And so what we told people is, okay, yeah, it's optional, but if you feel that the equity lensing results more accurately reflect risk in your community, feel free to use the equity lens results. Because what we found, and it was a real interesting exercise, is that by applying the lens, it added an extra layer of granularity to our analysis, to where we are actually able to fine tune the resolution of the impacts, especially on people, because we now have these 5 social vulnerability layers, right? Very high, relatively moderate, relatively low, or very low. So it was a real interesting exercise. We being the core planning team did a lot of throttle chasing, to looking at the numbers and measuring the impacts to make sure that there was no, negative impact. We established some protocol for default values. If X was greater than Y, it would default to a certain category. If X was less than Y, it would always default back to the baseline. And so far so good. I think the results that we got out of the equity lens were what we were expecting. And I know most of the planning partners are dealing with that data now and massaging, and we haven't heard too much squawking or what's going on here. This is just evidence to show you the metrics that we've applied. There's weighting for each of these categories. So the SOBI index has the very high, relatively moderate, relatively low, very low. And we've come up with weighting factors, and it's all based upon percent exposure, right? So we're looking at a census block, and if 50% of a census block intersects the floodplain, there's a weight and a value that's assigned to that 50% for that factor. And it comes up with an additive value for the score or for the impact. And so what we found was the areas that had more spatial distribution between the 5 social vulnerability categories, the higher the resolution. Now, we did have some jurisdictions that had no spatial distribution, 100% of their entire population, because they were small. And keep in mind, this data that is being used comes at a census tract level. So we would love it if it was at a block level, but unfortunately the resolution doesn't do that. The cities like Belmont, Atherton, small ones, they were all one category. So where we really saw the highest degree of resolution was in the larger cities, and then obviously the county as a whole and the unincorporated county. So this is the weighted metrics for social vulnerability. So I really want to just get to the results. This is the baseline results. Okay, so you'll notice we have all the hazards across the top. We have all the cities along the left. The maximum score you could get with the baseline is a 54. Okay, so if you're looking at these scores, and let's, for example, let's look at climate change. Belmont, the impact from climate change was high. Burlingame, it was high. You can see some 54s in here. And once again, this is a spatial distribution, right? We're looking at those sea level rise impact areas versus the total percentage of the population exposed. And that's how these weights are established. So it's a spatial analysis where we have a clearly defined extent and location. Now, drought, for example, there's no such thing as a 100-year drought zone or a 100-year wildfire severity, or not, sorry, severe weather severity zone. So the spatial distribution of those areas, we would just have to kind of qualitatively assign. And so what you're seeing here are the baseline results. And, we have them for each of the hazards going across the top. We've got 9 hazards of concern. And each of these are the weighted values for jurisdictions. So if you're Atherton, they got 0 for climate change, they got a 12 for dam failure, they got a 9 for drought, they got a 36 for earthquake, they got a 0 for flood, they got 18 for landslide, they got a 24 for extreme weather, they got 0 for tsunami, right? 0 exposure means 0 risk. So obviously the inland communities that aren't coastal are going to have some impacts where the coastal communities are not. Tsunami, wildfire, they had very little wildfire interface areas mapped or severe wildfire severity zones. So, and then you compare them to Belmont. Look at Belmont's difference. They got a high for climate change. They got a low for dam failure. Drought was low. Earthquake was high, etc. So each jurisdiction has its own risk ranking. Now, this has nothing to do with prioritization of actions. Okay. All this has to do is add the resolution each jurisdiction needs to know because what FEMA says and the state says is you must have at least one actionable item for each hazard of high impact. So if we go back to Atherton, right, and look, the earthquake was high, and that was it. So to meet the minimum bar established by FEMA for the plan review, they have to have at least one earthquake action. That meets the minimum bar. That doesn't mean they can't have actions for these other hazards that they want to do, but the minimum bar. And this is the one thing we went through with everybody to explain to them what that did. So that's our baseline scores. Now, let's look at what happened when we applied the equity lens. You can notice now, I'm not going to use Atherton because Atherton is one of those examples where we did not get a lot of spatial resolution because of the equity lensing, because they were a one census tract city. But if we look at like Redwood City, a bigger city, right? Look at climate change, and I'll go back. Let's see what Redwood City's climate change results were. Redwood City got a high, so it really didn't change the actual weight, but look at the difference in the score. It went from 54 to 126. Added resolution. We now, instead of saying one population, we are now trying to differentiate the vulnerability by sector in the population. So added resolution creates added impact. And so when you look at Redwood City, 126, 36 for high. In some cases, we didn't see too much change as far as the high impact hazards, but what we were able to see is a distinct impact, increase in impact, because these scores went through, not through the roof, but they increased by the associated metric. The one hazard where we did see a noticeable difference, where we saw some changes from like low to medium or medium to high, was dam failure. And I think we talked about this earlier. One of the big reasons, and we've had a change in risk for dam failure, is better mapping. 5 years ago, we did not have any dam failure inundation mapping produced by the state or federal level. So we had one mapped, and that was for only one dam. Well, what happened since 2016? We had a major event at Oroville, and the state tasked the state dam safety office to prepare dam inundation maps for every high hazard dam in the state. So now we are equipped with better data. The minute you get better data, you get increased resolution. So now all of a sudden we have dam failure being a very high impact hazard in San Mateo, where 5 years ago it was not. So, I mean, there's just a lot of increased resolution that you see here. Nobody's score went backwards. Okay, the equity lens option across the board with we didn't see a lot of impact in changing from high to medium, medium to high, or whatever. But what we saw was an increase in scores. So the equity lens did exactly what we expected it to do. It added a degree of vulnerability to our metric and added a degree of resolution to our findings. So everybody is now working with this. Now, what we have done is we've said, hey, qualitatively adjust the quantitative data based on local knowledge and perception. And so what we've told everybody is, if this equity lens score better represents what you think the impact of a hazard is, feel free to use it. You do not have to be one of the people that signed up to apply the equity lens. And I think we're going to see a lot of communities actually do that. I will tell you, everybody did ask, why is drought so low? Everybody's all asking about drought, and we're all in the middle of a drought. The problem with drought is that droughts don't kill people or damage property. The impacts that you see from droughts are purely economic. And yeah, they're significantly economic. But when you compare a drought to an earthquake, you can't possibly say they have the same impact, right? Earthquakes severely damage structures. They kill people. The functional downtime is way longer. So in the context of comparing a hazard to another, drought typically ranks low because it doesn't kill people or damage property. And remember, the metrics for risk is impact people, property, and economy. So if you're taking two of the factors that you're ranking drought out of the equation in the score, it's going to generate a low score. That's not to downplay the importance of drought. And what we have told all our planning partners is really to look at what your role in your community is. So if you're a city and you actually have a municipal responsibility, you have a municipal water service, you provide water services to your jurisdiction that falls under your jurisdictional authority. which in the state of California, it does occur, but it's not common. Most water service is deployed by water service districts or districts that have that taxing authority to provide that service. But if you're a municipality that has that, take that into context, because that is clearly a key element of your responsibility. But if you are not, and all that responsibility falls outside of your scope or your purview, then you should not be touching a drought score, because that is where the water district or the water service provider should be taking that into account, because remember, that's their service. And we have water districts all over the Bay Area that have either their own plan. We have several of the water districts that are participating in this plan. And what we've told the water districts, obviously with drought, yeah, drought's a big deal for you all, because that clearly impacts your ability to provide your service. And that's where we're weighting that continuity of operations in all that factor. So a lot of people, you know, once we explained it that way, felt a lot better about the drought scores and whatnot. Well, it's not, once again, just because drought ranks low does not mean that if you want to do water conservation actions or rain barrels to help mitigate, you know, drought impacts, those are great projects. FEMA funds them all the time, and it has no impact on eligibility or prioritization as far as the risk ranking result. So that's a lot of information in a very short window. I'd be glad to share this information with you all. Just so I don't open it to any questions, Rita, if there are any questions about the results of the risk ranking.
Yes, thank you so much. This is very good and detailed information, and you kept us waiting to get the actual numbers for this year. So nice job. So we're going to start with questions or comments from steering committee members, and Belen posted one on the chat. Why the equity lens did not change extreme weather scores?
Yeah, good question. Once again, it's because of the resolution. You know, what happened, because there's no spatial extent for severe weather, it's the entire area. And if you have one entire area and one metric, you don't get increased resolution. So we just, unfortunately, when you don't have a clearly defined extent location of a hazard boundary, you have to basically do it at a block level. And if we don't have resolution in that social vulnerability category of multiple layers, it's a monotone issue. So that to me, it's more about not having spatial extent location for extreme heat. There's no, you know, we have historic heat maps, but there's no probabilistic heat zone, right? It doesn't say, oh, this area is at more risk for severe heat than this area because of data analytics or mapping. So that's kind of why we didn't see any of that resolution. And you'll notice that the score is still relatively high at a 24. And a lot of that is because there is no spatial extent. It just assumes the risk is the same for everybody.
Thank you. Other members? Oh, go ahead, Belen.
No, I mean, we do have some models around extreme heat that the Office of Sustainability has been using. So I don't know if Hillary is here, but it might inform the thinking around like qualitatively change or using other sources to change the scores. I know that, for example, communities like East Palo Alto, North Fair Oaks, and Redwood City will be more impacted by a severe heat event than Daly City, for example.
Yeah. No,
so
and that's a great point. And I will say, well, yeah, you know, if there are models, we weren't scoped to run heat models to support our risk analysis. And remember, the focus of mitigation is really the built environment. So cooling centers, yeah, those are great. And we could actually develop cooling centers as a mitigation action. And that's pretty much the only severe heat mitigation action that FEMA will fund. On the preparedness side or the response side, which is a huge component where heat is really information, this plan doesn't do that. It's not a preparedness or a response plan. So, but your point is well taken in the fact that it could convey information that those other plans would use to either dictate how you're going to respond or prepare. But we did not run any of those special models, you know, because once again, it's focused on the built environment and looking at damage, you know, and as hot can get, it doesn't really damage buildings.
So Rob,
this is
Ann. we can, in the unincorporated area, or we can share it with our planning partners, we can include this information in our annex plans on a more of a qualitative basis, but as a way of supporting the that section and to be able to show the issues that might affect certain parts of our community. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, every qualitative local knowledge always outweighs quantitative, right? We're using best available data in science. I don't doubt that there's models, but I don't know that those models could generate data in the context of hazard mitigation planning that could plug into a hazardous model, for example. And so I'm sure those models would give us really good spatial extent for the impact on people, but that's only 1/3 of the equation. How do we measure the impact on economy? How do we measure the impact on property? And so I, once again, qualitatively, if and I just caution, right? People have a pet hazard and they sit there and say, yeah, extreme heat is really important. I'm not downplaying that. It is very important, especially in the response mode. But is it, in a context of comparing it to an earthquake, is it more impactful? If you had a San Andreas earthquake tomorrow, do you think extreme heat is going to cause more damage than the earthquake?
Sorry, Rob, just a second. I think Belen has a follow-up comment.
I do think that there's, for example, there's modeling that is showing how it impacts transportation infrastructure, given that there has been extreme heat events that, for example, like they, impacted how, trains were running and all that. So I think it's getting like at that, and there are ways to mitigate that. So that I'm not saying like we should, it's good that, it's like as far as the ranking, but it's not to be dismissed, or because we don't have right now the best data, we should at least pursue it. And I know Ann mentioned that in incorporated area we will add this. So maybe the conversation is around like, what are the gaps, and see how we can, in the next iteration of this, we can become much more sophisticated in modeling and preparing for those type of events.
Oh, absolutely. And every jurisdictional partner's annex has what we call a wish list section that says, hey, when we do this next time, what should we do? And if there's a partner that is really concerned about extreme heat and they know that this modeling exists, I sure as heck hope that they put in that wish list section, hey, next time we do this, we should really consider modeling extreme heat. And the funny thing is if that's really what the county wanted to do, they could have actually gotten grant funding as part of this planning grant to do those models. And now, once again, in a mitigation planning context, where it would have to be impact people, property, and economy. We don't do transportation analysis as part of mitigation plan. So I don't doubt that there are huge transportation impacts, but that's not a typical level of analysis for a mitigation plan. But once again, there's a placeholder for that, and that's a really good point, and we can share that hopefully with these meeting minutes and summaries with our partners, that if they are concerned about extreme heat, knowing that these models exist, they should put it in that future needs section.
And this comment from Belen will make it to the minutes also.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move to Chief Crossgrave.
Yeah, Rob, sorry, we're sending a strike team out to the lava fire up in Shasta right now, so you might have covered this, but under tsunami, the overall ranking says high, but none of the other, is there a reason why the total aggregate says it's in a high risk category?
Oh, for the county as a whole, the total county?
Yeah, because none of the other categories above it are in the high. I mean, the coastal areas and the places that touch water, obviously if it hits there, it's traumatic, but the chances are low.
Mm.
Yeah, so this is the equity lens option. What happened is this is the county's unincorporated areas of the county driving the result, right? Remember I told you had the highest degree of resolution in the biggest area, which is the county as a whole. So those weighted metrics, even though it might not be a much spatial extent, where our highest degree of social vulnerability is it's the entire area. So look at it as one big piece of pie. And now we've added that 6 degrees of social vulnerability to that one piece of pie, because let's go back and look at how it did on the baseline score. So you look at the baseline score, the tsunami impacts is 0, or is 6, came in at low. So that shows you how much weight the social vulnerability layer carries because you have these 6 degrees of resolution.
Okay.
It took the score from a 6 to a 36.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other steering committee members have questions? You can raise your hand or you can unmute and go ahead and ask your question. Okay, we're gonna open it to planning partners. Okay, we don't see any, I don't see any planning partners raising their hand. Members of the public, I think Rob Snow is a member of the public. His question was, and maybe you'll have to go back to the slide, but it says the matrix risk ranking seems to have all the same values across the board. Is there an updated matrix with actual ranking? Was this answered, Rob, with the rest of the presentation?
Okay, so what metric had the same score across the board? What was he? Is this in the comment or in the chat?
Yeah, it is in the chat. Rob, are you able to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah,
Rob,
I think it was answered in the first slide. He had all the values were the same, and in this present one, they look like they're updated now. I think that was part of my question. It just didn't make sense that they would have all the same values. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure you got your answer question.
Slide, Rob? Rob, were you talking about the comparison between this graphic and this graphic?
No, I was talking about one of your initial slides. One of your initial slides had you were presenting the form, I think, and everything had the same value. That one, I think. Yeah, it didn't. So it didn't make sense to me then.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why that was
so
there.
This column right here is probability. Yeah, so this column is probability, and so most of the time the probability is the same for each hazard because the probability is assigned for the hazard, right? So when we look at a 100-year floodplain, for example, when we give flood a high probability because you have a 67% chance of experiencing one 100-year flood in the life of a 30-year mortgage. And so based on the metrics, if you can experience a hazard within 30 years, we say it's a high probability. So you'll do that. The 2 is the metrics for earthquakes. And the reason being is it's a very high probability of occurrence for, and these metrics are assigned based upon what we call the earthquake catalog, where USGS assigns the probability. And so the earthquake probability is going to be the same for everybody. The impact factor based on that is the same for everybody. But where these numbers, now earthquake is a bad example because once again, the spatial extent of exposure is the entire area, right? Everybody's exposed to an earthquake. There's no 100-year earthquake zone. Now we do add resolution because we look at soils, we look at populations in different soils areas. But
yeah, I would say that my confusion is mathematically this thing represents sort of, because everything's the same, it's sort of useless. And I would sort of question that places like Portola Valley, which are on the San Andreas Fault, and places along the bay, which are on landfill and such, seems to me they would have higher damage ranking than places that are on rock, like in Menlo Park or in other locations. So to me, I don't know if I thought this was a template because it just simply had no value in the sense everything's the same. When in reality, if it was an earthquake, it seems like landfill and being on the fault would have higher ratings. I don't know how you would respond to that.
No, it does. And, we ran models, Rob. So if you look at the yellow column here, you see all of a sudden now you're looking at where you've got variation. And there's 2 key parameters to an earthquake when you run a model, right? Soil stability and proximity to the source. And then duration. Actually, there's 3 parameters. So how long is it going to shake? How stable is the ground? And how close am I to the epicenter? And the modeling that we use takes all of those factors into account. So you look at these damage percentages, soils and proximity to the source and actually building fragility factor has all been taken into account in these results. They're all extremely high. You know, for the San Andreas, this is only one example. We ran 5 different earthquake scenarios. You compare San Andreas to the other 4 that we ran, I mean, it's no contest. The impacts are staggering for the San Andreas. That's the one where it has the highest impact. When we modeled flood, you'll notice that we use depth damage correlation. How deep is the water? And we actually created depth grids. When we ran our dam failure, same thing. Dam inundation areas, how deep is the water? We actually generate loss estimations based upon the actual scoring. So I know this graphic, and this is one of 13 different slides like this. I just put it in here because it was showing the impacts of the San Andreas. I'd be glad to send out the loss matrix where you can actually see the results and how they distribute. It's not as monotone as it appears. I will say that there is a high degree of variability, especially in the loss estimation, which we actually have to do. And that's why we use models. We use the HAZUS model, which can actually shake the ground, flood the ground, blow the ground, and do all that kind of stuff. That makes sense?
Yeah, it's always suspect when all the numbers look the same, when in reality, they seem like they would have more variance. Anyway, no, but good job. I know.
All the numbers aren't the same. I think if we send out the loss matrix, you would see it. Yeah, they are for probability, because the probability doesn't change, right? I mean, there's one earthquake probability for an earthquake. It's not like, oh, the earthquake probability for San Andreas is a 30% probability, and in Redwood City, it's a 45% probability. The ground motion expected from the scenario varies, but the probability doesn't. Same thing with the flood, right? Is, you know, when you got a 100-year floodplain, you have that 1% annual chance based upon that hydrograph. And, you know, they generate floodplains along an entire riverine system or a coastal system. Some of the hazards where we don't have probabilistic mapping, where it's like this is a severity zone that's using historic data, you're a little closer to being more accurate because there's no probability assigned with that, right? It's just saying for wildfire, for example, it's just looking at slope, vegetation, temperature, and slope, vegetation, and temperature for the different degrees of severity. So great question, though. Very, very, I mean, if you'd like to see the loss matrix, I'd be glad to send it out to you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. And Ron, if you would like that, and I don't know if we have people's emails or if Rob should, Ron should write his email address on the chat. Let me know, please, or you can put it on the chat. And Timber also added a comment on the chat about Samstrand's model for extreme heat. And she said that she will share it. Any other questions from the general public? Okay, thank you, and great conversation. We are gonna move on a different presentation, but we'll continue to have Rob Flanner presenting. So just while he switches the presentations, let me tell you what he's gonna be talking about. He's gonna provide us with information now about the maintenance plan, which is what we will be followed during the 5-year life of the 2021 multi-jurisdictional LHMP.
Hey, are you seeing the new slide presentation, Maria?
Yeah, mitigation plan maintenance.
Okay. Yep. All right. Great. So this is another required component, and this is the really, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of any mitigation plan. This is the part of the plan where it helps keep the plan dynamic and a living, breathing document after it's done. And it is a requirement that every mitigation plan have what we call a plan maintenance strategy, and how are you going to maintain and implement the plan. So this plan will have, and it'll be chapter, I think, 20 in the plan. We'll have a robust plan maintenance strategy, and it's committed to doing annual maintenance. When I say annual maintenance, it's going to be looking at progress annually, and we'll be generating what's called an annual progress report. They're going to be using a tool. It's a Tetra Tech tool called the BAT tool. BAT tool stands for a baseline assessment tool. And it's an automated web-based platform where each partner once a year will go in and actually be able to complete online the status of their action plan, whether it's been completed, whether it's been not completed, whether it needs to have its priority changed. This is the dynamic component, and this is an actual adopted portion of the plan. Every partner is adopting this strategy, and they're committed to doing an annual progress report. And what's the beauty of it is it allows the plan, you to change the plan on the fly without having to do a full-blown update, because it's part of the strategy you're adopting to maintain the implementation of the plan. So once a year, everybody will go into the back tool, report on the progress. If they want to add a new action, that's the time to do it. You can actually add an action with the BAT tool. If you want to remove an action, you can actually remove an action. Let's say you determine that the action is no longer feasible or whatnot. The real important thing is for everybody is going to be, this is where they can change a priority. We have some very strict prioritization criteria that we put in play for how to prioritize these plans. We actually are doing 3 priorities, one for implementation, one for pursuit of grant funding, and then for those that are choosing to apply the equity lens, there's a social equity priority. So the annual progress report, if something has changed or whatever, is the best way to do that. So that annual progress report will be generated once a year. It'll go on the website. It'll actually be submitted to the County Board of Supervisors as a consent agenda item to just, advise them of what's going on. It's also a great opportunity to coordinate grants and talk about grant activity when it's done. So there's going to be 2 meetings a year by the steering committee, you all, and the partnership will meet twice a year to kind of set the table for progress reporting. They're going to meet in January. January kind of helps set the table for budgeting and kind of the status check-in, with July being the targeted time frame for progress reporting, which is ideal because grant windows for some of the pre-disaster programs, what we'll talk about in a minute, will all be opening in September. So if you're all kind of blowing the dust off the plan in July and saying, what is it we want to do and whatnot, getting your progress report done in July is the ideal situation. So this plan maintenance strategy is very robust. Twice a year is very ambitious. The BAT tool is a great aid. I know a lot of the planning partners that are on the call today remember the BAT tool. It was a tool that was utilized for the implementation of the 2016 plan. And it's a great way to stay engaged, okay? I will tell you, progress reporting is not a FEMA requirement. It's a best management practice. It's an advisory role, and the CRS communities, those communities that participate in the CRS program, have to do annual progress reporting. So that's kind of one of the reasons why you see it in here, because we have several cities that participate in the CRS program. So I will also tell you, and just kind of as an item up for just FYI is, one of the big grant programs that everybody wants to be eligible for is called BRIC. BRIC stands for Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. And so this is pre-disaster money. It's based upon federal legislation that has set aside 6% of the total disaster costs in any calendar year. So the calendar year is September to September. So every single time there's a presidential disaster declaration in the country, and this includes territories, all 50 states, 6% of the total cost of that disaster is getting set aside for proactive mitigation grants. And this BRIC grant window will always run, September to December. Last year was the first year. The pot for this year is in excess of $1 billion. 50 million maximum federal share for projects. It has an emphasis on infrastructure. It has an emphasis on infrastructure. It has also, and we are anticipating this coming out in NOFO, it's also going to be emphasizing the decrease in social vulnerability and mitigating the impacts from climate change. So this is one of those really, really nice programs that it's pre-disaster. It's not contingent on a disaster happening in the state of California. It is nationally competitive, which means you got to have really good projects. They got to be well vetted, well validated, and a dynamic plan. And you have that with this twice a year plan maintenance strategy. Is the dynamic planning component they are looking for plan maintenance and implementation. So I'm going to say that this planning partnership for San Mateo should be well positioned to be very successful in the BRIC grant arena. Now, this is only one of the FEMA grant programs that's eligible. If there are fires or floods and earthquakes or landslides in the state that trigger presidential disaster declarations, there'll be post-disaster money. There is always some sort of disaster activity going on in California. There are 3 open disasters right now that have funding associated with them. That's what they call the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. And this is all post-disaster money. And that's another reason why it's really important to have coordination going on with you all so that you can monitor and stay apprised of all these grant opportunities that are out there. Because remember, that's one of the principal drivers for doing a mitigation plan is so that you can be eligible for all this money. So I'm very emboldened by the fact that you have a very robust plan maintenance strategy and a good leadership through county OES to make sure that that gets done. So that's the plan maintenance strategy in a nutshell. Is the entire maintenance plan in the outreach packet?
No,
Or
not
in
right
the packet
now.
for this? Okay. Are we going to distribute that at some point to the steering committee?
Yes, we're going to distribute that prior to our session in July, which we'll be talking about in an upcoming part of the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, so you'll all have a chance to read the actual plan maintenance strategy. It has other required components about continuing public involvement and what do you do if you have a disaster and when do you have to update the plan, et cetera. But you'll get a chance to look at it. That I'll open the floor for questions, Rita.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, if there are any questions or comments, we'll start with the steering committee members. Okay, no comments on this group. From the planning partners? Okay, and from the public? Okay, I don't see any hands out and I don't see anything on the chat. So we'll conclude this part of our agenda. And now we're gonna have Bart with us and he's gonna give us an update on the planning process. These 3 items that we have touched on so far do not require a vote, it's just information. And so the same thing will be for this next presentation from Bart. And at the end, we're gonna have time for questions from steering committee members, planning partners, and the public. So you can take it, Bart.
Great, thanks Rita. Good afternoon, everybody. As Rob mentioned earlier in the meeting, we did have workshops earlier this month and they were well attended and asked lots of questions. And we do realize that there's a lot of information that's out there. The county was able to set up a box account for us. So we've been able to put all the information for planning partners into their box accounts and they can go in there and find that out. In addition to that, we've been holding weekly sessions on Wednesday. We had our first session last Wednesday and we'll have our second one this week. And that's for planning partners to call in and ask questions. And there's no specific agenda, but so far we've had success in other jurisdictions. And then with our call last week, we had a lot of people coming in and asking questions. One of the things that we found that's nice is sometimes people call in and they just want to listen and they want to hear what other people have ideas or collaborations. And I think that shows good interaction among the jurisdictions. And so we'll be continuing those weekly call-ins from now until the end of July, the week right before that it's due, that the phase 3 is due. And so we have let them know multiple times that the phase 3 is due, the annex for phase 3 is due July 23rd. There are no exceptions, there are no extensions. We've tried to make that very clear because we start public comment on August 5th. And we'll run public comment and our intention is to submit to Cal OES and FEMA at the end of August 31st. And it is a concurrent review. And we're looking for an expedited review process from both Cal OES and FEMA. And that's what I have. And I will let you read facilitate any questions.
Thank you, Bart. Pretty simple next steps, but let's open it up for steering committee members' comments or questions. Okay, I don't see anyone. Planning partners? Okay. And the public. Okay. Thank you. Then we'll have concluded this part of the agenda, and now we're gonna have Anne and Hillary give us an update on the schedule and the outreach efforts, which is as important as the plan. And I think many of the steering committee members chose to participate precisely because we care a lot about the outreach that is done to engage particularly communities that often are underrepresented. So let's have Anne and Hillary, please.
Thank you very much. To begin, we're just going to do a very quick recap of June. June was a very busy month. We've done a number of presentations to a variety of organizations throughout the county on a number of topics. So we started June with our wildfire risk and resilience presentation, which was sponsored by One Shoreline and the League of Women Voters, and a number of people who are participating as planning partners and on our steering committee participated in that event. We kicked off our second survey with seeking input on actual mitigation actions, and Hillary will give you an update about that survey when we get into the outreach section. We've worked, again, another example of one of our community organizations doing a presentation at a staff meeting and a peer support group with the Center for Independence of Individuals with Disabilities. And we did the 1-hour session on hazards risk assessment with our steering committee and planning partners. This is the 1-hour version of what Rob walked us through here today. And I think I've seen the presentation a number of times, and I have to say, every time I see it, I learn a little bit more. So thank you, Rob, for continuing to present this information. That was just June 10th. So as we got later in the month or later into June, we were working again more with our community partners. We started the phase 3 assignments being sent to the planning partners. And for all of you who have managed to go into that box link that Bart talked about, there's a lot of files there, and I know I'm only still working my way through them. We did some follow-up work with the Bay Area Community Health Advisory Council, and we had the mandatory workshops for the planning partners, which Bart also just spoke about, but I do have to thank all of our planning partners. We had 100% attendance for all of the partners who are moving forward, and we really appreciate the efforts you're making to be active participants in this endeavor. Now we're just to the middle of June. So again, we had last week a number of events with our partners and with our community-based organizations. And I understand that in particular, the presentation on June 23rd to the Climate Resilient Communities event was very well attended. The North Fair Oaks Community Council also welcomed us. Dan Belville and I did that presentation together, and we appreciated the opportunity to speak with that group. Bart mentioned that beginning last week and continuing through July 21st, we do the weekly Q&A sessions with our planning partners. And here we are today at the steering committee. So that was our month of June. It took 3 slides to talk about what we completed in June. Moving forward into July, we're very much focused on the items that are related to getting our final documents together. For those who have had an opportunity to go on our website and looked at the 2016 plan, you will note that there are 2 volumes. There's volume 1, which talks about the multi-jurisdictional plan as a whole and has information that is pertinent to all of our partners. And then there's planning 2, where each partner gets their own chapter. The annex plan has a chapter. So because the volume 1 information pertains to everyone, we are going to have another non-mandatory session providing to our steering committee and our planning partners on July 15th. That presentation by Tetra Tech will talk a lot about how the demographics of our community are represented in the volume 1. We'll also be looking at mitigation actions that affect all of us on a countywide basis. And we'll go into more in-depth on the maintenance plan that Rob gave you a preview of today. Following this meeting, I will send out a RSVP link to the steering committee and planning partners inviting you to this session. So please keep a lookout for that if you are interested. Then in the middle of July, we will be continuing our outreach to the community, the Pescadero MAC. We've been invited, the county staff has been invited to participate in a presentation to the Menlo Park City Council. And the big date, it probably should have been in red or yellow or some other color, but the big date, our phase 3 assignments are due from the planning partners to Tetra Tech. We will have a steering committee meeting a few days later on July 26th. That will be our last steering committee meeting, but we will be hoping to see you all in August. So as we move into the August deadlines, you'll see why the July 23rd date is so important, because by August 5th, we will be releasing the draft of the entire multi-jurisdictional LHMP for public comment. That'll be a lot of heavy lifting for Tetra Tech and probably us as partners in helping them with follow-up between July 23rd and August 5th. On August 12th, we have our second public workshop where we'll be talking about how to review the draft and presenting that information to the public. We really encourage all of our steering committee members and planning partners to attend that. The link to that workshop is on our website, as that is a public workshop and it is in our events section. Public comment will end on August 23rd because no later than August 31st, we have to submit the plan to Cal OES and FEMA for concurrent review. That is a very important deadline as we want to maintain our grant eligibility status in order to participate in the BRIC grants that Rob spoke to earlier. In September, we will have a training for the partners on the BAT tool. And we'll be talking about the annual maintenance reporting and how that tool can be used for that effort. And we're hoping that we'll get a quick review, but we have left open sort of the September through December date for a review by Cal OES, and then ultimately adoption by all of our planning partners and the County Board of Supervisors of the plan once we've gotten the comments back from Cal OES and FEMA. So that's what we're going to be doing between now and December. What I think what might be easier, Rita, is if Hillary goes ahead with the outreach update, then we can just take questions about the schedule and the outreach at the same time.
Sounds good.
Great, thanks, Anne. So I'm going to provide a little more information on our outreach efforts to date and gave a great summary with the table. Here's a little bit more information. So as I think most of you remember, in late January, we released a request for quotes for community-based organizations to help support the outreach for this effort. And we contracted with 8 organizations spanning the county, especially focusing on our underserved areas and vulnerable communities, especially vulnerable to hazards. So here's the organizations that we've worked with, and I'm so very grateful to the organization's interest in working on this issue and all of the work they've done over the last few months to help increase the outreach on this effort. We've just had a really great success and a lot of really interesting input from community members as a result of these efforts. So some summary of what we've done. We've focused on focus groups. We've done presentations at existing meetings and individual one-on-one outreach. We've reached over 600 people through the work of the organizations that I mentioned. And as Anne said, some examples, we worked with Nuestra Casa to conduct a focus group with participants of their Environmental Justice Academy. And last week, we worked with the City of East Palo Alto, the City of Menlo Park, and climate resilient communities to reach community members in East Palo Alto and Bellhaven. It had great attendance. I think it was over 60 people. I don't have the final numbers, but we were really pleased with the input we got from that meeting. We also, the community-based organizations have been really successful in distributing the survey. For example, Bay Area Community Health Advisory Committee was giving out surveys at the vaccine events and having people fill them out between meetings. On the coast, we've been giving out, ALAS has been distributing surveys to some of their farm workers and events that they have. And social media and email newsletters have been really successful as well, leading to over 30,000 impressions through social media. So Anna's mentioned our second survey. It's out right now. I was just going to give a little more information about the goal of this survey. So this survey is focused on gathering input on mitigation actions. And it focuses on wildfire, extreme weather, and earthquake, and addresses these two main questions. How can we help reduce the risks of hazards in your community? And how can we help your family and neighbors get organized and prepared before a disaster? It also asks about how people get information about hazards in their community. So this can help inform the communications that we do on hazards. The survey is quick. It's should take about 5 minutes. And we really encourage, if you haven't filled it out yet, to take it and you live in San Mateo County, take it and then distribute it through your networks. The survey is open until July 11th. We'll be sending preliminary results to the steering committee and planning partners by July 7th, and then final results by July 14th. As of this morning, so this is updated from the packet that went out, we've received 364 responses, with 2 in Chinese and 61 in Spanish. Here's a map of the distribution of the responses we've received. And you can see that we have received the most in some areas that are socially vulnerable. So we're pleased to see that. There are also work to do to increase the responses and have a distribution that's equal throughout the county. So this is, like, as with the first survey, it's definitely a partnership effort in sharing the word and encouraging people to fill out the survey. Here is a QR code for the survey. So you can lift your phone up to this and get the direct link to the survey. It's available in Spanish and English and Chinese. And that's the summary of our outreach efforts to date. And I really want to thank the planning partners and community-based organizations and everyone on, this has been a partnership effort on outreach.
Thank you, Hillary and Anne. Lots happening. So if you have any questions or comments about the activities either in June or all the activities coming up, or questions about the outreach activities, let's start with the steering committee members. Okay, I don't see any hand raised or anything on the chat. Planning partners. Okay, and the general public, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself. Okay, I don't think that we have any comment. Well, maybe it's because there's a lot that has been done and a lot of good things related to outreach as well. Thank you so much for all of that. And just before we adjourn, we just want to make sure that if anybody has any other question related to the items that we revisited today, that you have an opportunity to ask comments or questions. Am I doing this right, Anne? Yeah, right? Okay. So I'll start with the steering committee members. Okay, nothing there. The planning partners. great. And the public? Okay, you should know it's hard to multitask and look at the names and look at the chat and look at your faces. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And Hillary, anything else to add before we part?
No, just thank you, everybody.
All right, we'll see you soon in our next last meeting in July. But thank you so much for your time and expertise, and also for your contributions based on your life experiences as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.